Justice, my foot. That was Donald Trump's sneer. 3 words meant to crush Jasmine Crockett before she even spoke. But here's the truth. In a country where over 65 million Americans still say justice depends on skin color, and where 1 in 3 black citizens report being unfairly targeted by the system, those words carried more than arrogance. They carried history. This wasn't just another hearing, it was a battlefield. On one side, Donald Trump, the 47th president, clinging to power through insults, deception, and brute force. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, a relentless warrior for justice, standing in a chamber that has silenced voices like hers for over 200 years. What followed wasn't politics, it was war. And it began the moment she fired back. The hearing chamber trembled with noise. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured. The hum of a restless nation pressed against the walls. And in the middle of it all, Donald Trump sat like a king on a crumbling throne. His tie blazed red against the pale marble. His chin tilted upward, lips curled in a smirk that told everyone, "I own this room." It wasn't confidence, it was defiance. Sharp, arrogant, poisonous. Jasmine Crockett hadn't even asked her first question. She was still flipping open her binder when it came. Trump leaned forward, hand heavy on the microphone. His voice cracked through the chamber like a whip. 3 words, venomous, contemptuous. A dagger meant to slice her down before she even rose. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cameras snapped like gunfire. Even the chairman froze, gavel hovering useless in the air. Jasmine's hands stilled on her binder. Her breath caught. For a fraction of a second, her eyes closed, as if deciding whether to let it slide. But then her chair scraped back against the floor. The sound cut the chamber like steel against stone. She stood. Her voice, when it came, was not measured. It was not polite. It was not the language of politics. It was raw, unfiltered, sharp enough to draw blood. Her words slammed into Trump like a hammer. The insult was so direct, so scorching, the entire chamber erupted. Gasps turned into shouts. Reporters jolted forward, their pens flying. One senator actually covered his mouth in disbelief. Trump's smirk vanished. His jaw clenched. He slammed his palm against the desk, rattling microphones, his voice exploding in fury. "Watch your mouth," he roared, his finger stabbing the air toward her like a spear. But Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink. She leaned forward, both hands on the table, her eyes blazing straight into his. "You've poisoned this country long enough," she shot back, "and today the poison meets its cure." The audience roared again, half in shock, half in awe. Trump's face burned red. He snarled, his words spilling fast, furious, dripping with venom. "This is my chamber, my America. You don't belong here." Jasmine's reply was ice and fire together. "This chamber belongs to the people, and they're done choking on your lies." The words rang out like a bell, slicing the noise, demanding to be heard. Even the marble walls seemed to carry her voice. For a moment, silence, heavy, breathless. Then the explosion. The chamber thundered with shouts, gasps, and pounding fists on wood. The gavel crashed again and again, desperate to restore order. But order was gone. It was no longer a hearing. It was combat. The kind of combat America hadn't seen in decades. Every word Trump spat, she countered with sharper steel. Every attempt to belittle her only gave her more fire. Every insult he launched turned into fuel for her defiance. The bully's roar was met with the warrior's thunder. And across the country, millions leaned closer to their screens. In living rooms from Texas to New York, on phones clutched in trembling hands, people whispered the same thing. She's not afraid of him. It was unthinkable, unbelievable. And yet it was happening. History wasn't whispering anymore. It was shouting. With every clash, with every strike, with every brutal word, the storm grew darker. This was not debate. This was not discourse. This was war with words sharpened into weapons. And it had only just begun. Moments like this don't come often. Moments when truth refuses to bow, when power is forced to face its reckoning. If you want to walk deeper into this storm, don't just watch from the sidelines. Subscribe now, because here at Harrison Stories, we don't just tell history, we relive it. The gavel fell 3 times, each strike echoing like thunder. But the chamber refused to calm. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her mic. Her eyes never left Trump. The room waited. Every reporter's pen hovered. Every camera light burned hot. And then she spoke. "Mr. President," she began, her voice steady, sharp as broken glass. "For years you have cloaked yourself in patriotism while selling this nation's soul to the highest bidder." The words hit the room like a blade slicing silk. No preamble, no hesitation. Straight to the jugular. You incited violence. You spread lies. You treated the Constitution like a rag to wipe your shoes. Her voice rose, cutting through the murmurs. And today you will answer, not as a leader, but as a man who put his power above his people. The audience gasped. One reporter's jaw dropped open. Even some senators leaned back, stunned by the ferocity. Trump slammed his fist against the table. "Lies!" he bellowed, his voice booming. "Every word you spit is a damn lie." He leaned forward, spittle flying, his face contorted in fury. "You should be thanking me for saving this country, not tearing me down in front of these clowns." The chairman's gavel crashed again, desperate, useless. "Order! Order!" he shouted, but his voice was drowned in the storm. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her gaze never wavered. She lifted her hand, silencing the noise around her, and delivered her next strike. "You call it saving the country?" she shot back. "You tore families apart. You emboldened hate. You turned your rallies into breeding grounds of violence. Blood spilled because of you." The words dripped like acid. Every syllable seared deeper. Trump's face flushed crimson. He barked over her, trying to drown her out. "You're nothing, a nobody. Without me, you wouldn't even have a seat at this table." His insults came fast, frantic, desperate. But Jasmine raised her voice above his roar, her words slicing through like lightning splitting the sky. "Without you," she said, "this nation might still believe in truth." The gallery erupted. Gasps, shouts, the metallic click of cameras capturing every flicker of fury. The tension in the air was electric, choking, alive. The chairman pounded his gavel again, his voice breaking with strain. "Order! This is a hearing, not a circus." But no one listened. Not Trump, not Jasmine, not the crowd holding its breath. This was not a hearing anymore. It was a duel. Two warriors locked in combat, their weapons words, their arena, the chamber floor. Trump sneered, his voice a growl. "You talk about lies? Look in the mirror. You and your so-called justice are the real poison here." Jasmine leaned forward, her tone calm but lethal. "The mirror doesn't lie, Mr. President, and what it shows is a man terrified of his own reflection." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence before another storm. Trump's chair screeched back as he stood, his frame towering, his finger stabbing toward her like a weapon. "You dare lecture me? I built this country. I made America strong again." Jasmine stood too, the two locked eye to eye. Her voice cut through his roar like steel through flesh. "You didn't build America. You bled it." The chamber shuddered with the sound. Even the marble seemed to tremble. Reporters scribbled furiously. Spectators clutched the railings. Millions watching from home felt the same shiver down their spine. This was no longer about evidence. No longer about procedure. This was about truth clawing its way out of the dark, and the lies fighting to bury it alive. Every insult was a strike. Every rebuttal, a counterpunch. The hearing floor had become a battlefield where words cut deeper than any blade. And in that battlefield, the nation's eyes were fixed on two figures. One desperate to hold power, the other daring enough to challenge it. The storm was no longer contained. It was spilling into every corner of America, and it was only growing darker. This was not spectacle. This was reckoning, and the reckoning had just drawn first blood. The silence cracked like glass. Trump's nostrils flared. His jaw twitched. His eyes narrowed into slits of fury. The man who had spent his life dodging accountability now did what he always did best. He went low. "Look at you," he sneered, his voice dripping poison. "A second-rate congresswoman with second-rate looks. You think you scare me?" The words stung, sharp and cruel. A ripple ran through the chamber. Gasps, a few shocked laughs, the shuffle of reporters scribbling faster. But Trump wasn't finished. Not even close. You stand there pretending to be some champion of justice, but everybody knows where you came from, he barked. A nobody from nowhere, pretending she belongs on this stage. You'll never be in my league. The insult hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't policy anymore. It wasn't even argument. It was a knife aimed at her very identity. Jasmine's face flushed red. Her knuckles tightened against the table. But her eyes stayed locked on him, unwavering, unbroken. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clipped, lethal. You think mocking my looks makes you stronger? She said. No, Mr. President, it makes you small. The chamber exploded with a roar. Shouts, gasps, nervous laughter. The tension cracked into something raw, wilder. Trump barked over the noise. Small? I built towers taller than you'll ever dream of. I built an empire. What have you built, except excuses? Jasmine leaned in, her voice slicing clean through his bellow. I've built trust. I've built community. Things you could never buy, no matter how gold you paint your name. The crowd erupted again, some cheering, others jeering, the chamber now less a hearing than an arena. Trump's face twisted. He jabbed his finger at her, words tumbling like fire. You're a fraud. You don't love this country. You hate it. You want to tear it down with your phony causes, your race baiting, your fake justice. The attack was brutal, personal, designed to draw blood. But Jasmine did not retreat. Her lips curled into the hint of a smile. Her reply came swift, sharp as a dagger. If loving America means worshiping you, then yes, I hate that America. The one you twisted into a carnival of hate, and I'll fight for the real one until my last breath. The chamber erupted, louder than before. Cheers mingled with boos, creating a storm of voices that shook the marble walls. The chairman's gavel slammed again, helpless, drowned beneath the roar. Order! Order! He shouted, his voice cracking. But the crowd didn't care. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was blood sport. Trump leaned back, smirk flashing again, but his eyes betrayed him. This was not a man in control. This was a man lashing out, desperate to wound. And Jasmine? She had turned his venom into her fire. You can sneer at my face, my roots, my fight, she said, her voice cutting through the roar. But every time you try to break me, you remind this nation of why I'm standing here. To show them that bullies fall. And justice. She paused, letting the word hang. Heavy, electric. Justice rises. The crowd rose with her words, a wave of noise crashing like thunder through the chamber. Applause. Shouts. Even laughter from those who relished seeing the bully struck down by wit sharper than his cruelty. Trump snarled, his words drowning in the uproar. You're nothing but a clown, a puppet for weaklings. You don't scare me, Crockett. You never will. But the chamber didn't hear him. Not really. Because Jasmine's words still lingered, echoing in the walls, reverberating in the hearts of those watching. The duel had transformed. It wasn't just accusations anymore. It was survival. It was spectacle. It was war stripped of rules. Every insult Trump hurled bounced back sharper, harder. Every sneer only gave Jasmine another opening. The heat was rising, fast, suffocating. And in that chamber, it felt like history wasn't just being written, it was being shouted. It was being fought for, tooth and nail, word by word. This was no longer a hearing. This was a death match of legacies. And neither one of them was stepping back. The chamber was already trembling from the verbal war. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Not even close. She reached down, hands steady, and lifted a folder bound in red. The room hushed instantly. Even the chairman froze, mid-gavel. Jasmine laid the folder on the desk and flipped it open. Pages rustled like the whisper of a blade unsheathed. These, she said, her voice low but lethal, are internal memoranda. Communications that show, in black and white, how Donald J. Trump bent the powers of this office, not for the people, not for the Constitution, but for himself. A collective gasp surged through the chamber. Reporters nearly fell over themselves, pens scratching, cameras clicking like frantic thunder. Jasmine held up a single page, her finger pressing to the ink. This is not conjecture. This is not speculation. This is evidence. Your words, your orders, your abuse of power. Her words landed like cannon fire. It was the strike she had been waiting for. The hammer meant to end the duel in one crushing blow. For a flicker of a moment, Trump's face faltered. His eyes darted to the page, his lips tightened. But then, just as quickly, the mask snapped back on. He slammed his hand flat against the table, his voice exploding like a bomb. Fake! The word reverberated through the chamber, shaking every ear. Fake documents, fake news. Nothing but another witch hunt, cooked up by bitter losers who can't handle the truth. He rose from his chair, towering, his fingers stabbing toward Jasmine like a weapon. You think a few pieces of paper can break me? I'm the President of the United States. My word outweighs your little stunts 1,000 times over. The chamber boiled over. Shouts, cheers, jeers. Some pounded the desks in outrage, others in support. For a split second, it looked as though he had flipped the script. The weight of his office pressed down on the room like an iron hand. Some senators nodded in agreement, others cowered in silence. And in the gallery, a few voices even shouted in his defense. Jasmine stood silent, her hand still resting on the damning papers. The noise swirled around her like a hurricane, but she didn't move. She didn't need to. Her eyes, those eyes locked on Trump, told a different story. A spark flickered there. A quiet fire that said, "You think this is all I have?" Trump leaned forward, seizing the moment, barking louder. "You're pathetic, dragging up scraps of paper that mean nothing. This is the best you've got? I've crushed bigger enemies than you before breakfast." The crowd roared with laughter and shouts, the chamber now more like a coliseum than a seat of law. For a moment, the balance tilted. For a moment, it felt like Trump's bluster had buried the blade Jasmine had unsheathed. But then, she smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't showy. It was small, sharp, and dangerous, like the glint of a dagger still hidden beneath the cloak. Jasmine slowly closed the folder, her movements deliberate, her gaze never leaving Trump's face. "You call this fake?" she said softly. So softly the room leaned in to hear. "Then I suppose you won't mind what comes next." Trump's smirk faltered, just slightly, but enough for those watching closely to see it. The chamber stilled. The noise, the shouts, even the laughter seemed to choke in the air. Something had shifted, something unseen, but undeniable, because Jasmine hadn't played her final card, not yet. And every soul in that chamber, friend, foe, or spectator, sensed it. The duel was not over. The knockout blow had not yet landed, but it was coming, and Trump knew it. The storm was far from finished. The evidence on the table was only the opening salvo. The real weapon was still concealed, waiting, ready to strike. And when it came, the reckoning would burn brighter than ever. Jasmine leaned into the microphone. The static crackled like electricity in a storm. Her voice cut through the chamber with a clarity so sharp it sliced the air in half. "You," she said, staring straight at Trump, "are a liar to America." The words landed like a gunshot. 3 words, each syllable dripping with venom, echoing through the chamber, spilling into every microphone, every recording device, every camera. The gallery gasped. Phones lit up like wildfire as reporters scrambled to post the quote before anyone else. Trump's face went crimson. Not the controlled flush of a practiced politician, but the raw eruption of a man whose pride had just been dragged through the mud before the entire world. He slammed his fist against the desk. The wood cracked under the force, and then he roared. "You dare," his voice thundered, "to stand there and insult me, the greatest president this nation has ever seen? You, nothing, you nobody, how dare you?" His words tore through the chamber like a beast uncaged. Spit flew from his lips as he leaned forward, shouting over the microphone, his face twisted with fury. "You call me a liar? You're the disgrace. You're the fraud. You're the one destroying this country with your pathetic little games." Jasmine didn't flinch, not even a blink. Her eyes locked on him, burning, steady. Her voice returned, steady as a blade. "You betrayed the people you swore to serve. You sold out the truth. You've turned the Oval Office into your personal circus, and now you want to scream at me for saying it out loud?" The audience erupted. Some clapped, some booed, some just gasped, unable to believe what they were witnessing. It wasn't politics anymore. It was blood sport. The moderators pounded their gavels, shouting for order, but their voices were drowned beneath the avalanche of noise. Trump bellowed again, slamming the desk so hard his paper scattered like frightened birds. "You're trash. You're filth. You don't even belong in the same room as me." The cameras zoomed in, capturing every twisted snarl, every ounce of venom in his words. And in the next shot, Jasmine, standing tall, calm, unshaken, her jaw set like stone. She leaned into her mic again, and her voice, low, deliberate, unyielding, rolled like thunder. "You can scream all you want, Mr. Trump, but America hears the truth tonight. And the truth is this: you are nothing but a fraud in a suit, a fraud who thought he could fool us forever." The room shook. The words ricocheted across walls, through cameras, straight into the bloodstream of the internet. And then, boom, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. Clips exploded across timelines. The quote flashing in bold text. Millions of shares racing across screens like lightning. "Liar to America, fraud in a suit." The hashtags ignited. The memes came instantly. One clip showed Trump's face turning red, while Jasmine's words played on loop. Another paired her glare with subtitles in fire-red letters. The world wasn't just watching anymore. It was participating. The chamber had transformed into the largest stage on Earth, and every second was feeding the beast of viral spectacle. Trump, blinded by rage, kept pounding, kept howling, his words devolving into raw insult. "Disgusting, stupid, weak, total loser." But every insult, every scream, every spittle-flecked outburst only deepened the contrast. One man unhinged, one woman unshaken. The cameras didn't lie, and America didn't look away. The duel had become a firestorm, a living inferno impossible to contain. Viewers at home leaned forward, glued to their screens, hearts pounding like they were watching the final round of a heavyweight fight. Every second was addictive, every word a spark, every glare a dagger. And through it all, Jasmine never lost her footing. Not once. She delivered each line like it was etched in iron, like it was not just her voice, but the voice of the millions watching, hungry for someone, anyone, to stand unafraid. The hearing was supposed to be order, protocol, procedure. Instead, it had mutated into a showdown so raw, so unfiltered, that people would talk about it for years. It wasn't the Senate floor anymore. It was an arena, and only one of them would walk away untarnished. Trump roared one last time, veins bulging in his neck, his hands slamming down again with a crash that silenced even his supporters. But Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her voice cutting like lightning through the silence he left behind. "History will not remember your rage," she said. "It will remember your lies." The words hung heavy in the chamber, heavy in the airwaves, heavy in the millions of phones buzzing with notifications across the world. And in that moment, Trump knew. The internet had already chosen its victor. Outside the chamber, the clips continued to spread. The quotes, the glares, the clash. It was wildfire, and there was no stopping it. A nation divided, but united in one truth. They could not look away. And if you've stayed hooked this long, waiting for every twist in this battle, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe to Harrison Stories and never blink, because the fire has only just begun. The fire had scorched the chamber. The echoes of rage still trembled in the air. But Trump, sensing the raw heat wasn't enough, shifted. He leaned back in his chair. The fury drained from his face, replaced by something colder, more calculating. And then slowly the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Not a warm smile, not a human smile. A smirk, sharp, mocking, dripping with the poison of someone who believed he could twist the moment back in his favor. He chuckled into the microphone, a low rumbling sound that made the gallery stir uneasily. "Look at her," he sneered. "So angry, so desperate. It's pathetic, really." Laughter. But it wasn't the audience. It was his own, heavy, deliberate. He let it hang in the air, a dagger of contempt. "This is what America gets," he continued, gesturing lazily toward Jasmine. "Some angry little performer, screaming for attention, hoping somebody cares. But nobody cares, Jasmine. Nobody." The words were no longer shouted. They were whispered with venom, each one sinking deep. This was not brute force. This was psychological warfare. Jasmine sat still, her hands folded, her gaze steady. For a moment she said nothing. No defense, no interruption. The silence stretched, longer, heavier, so heavy that even Trump's smirk began to falter, if only for a flicker of a second. But he doubled down. "Oh, she's quiet now," he said, leaning back, arms spread wide as if he'd just won the round. "That's the silence of defeat. That's the silence of someone who knows she's out of her league." The audience murmured. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Still, Jasmine did not move. She let the silence work, let it tighten around him like a noose. And then, finally, she leaned forward. Her voice was soft, not a shout, not a scream. Just a single, deliberate strike. "Silence isn't weakness, Mr. Trump. It's the sound of you digging your own grave." The room froze. Trump blinked, just once. His smirk wavered for the first time. The words landed with the weight of a hammer. Simple, precise, deadly. The audience erupted, not with noise, but with energy, a sharp inhale, the unmistakable shift of momentum. And in that instant, the tide began to turn. Members of Congress who had been leaning back in their chairs suddenly leaned forward. Faces that had been unreadable now tilted ever so slightly toward Jasmine. The neutral ground, the deciding ground, was moving. Trump tried to recover, forcing another laugh, louder this time, almost desperate. But it didn't land. It sounded hollow. Jasmine seized the moment. She didn't give him space to rebuild. Her words came like arrows, not shouted but measured, deliberate. "You hide behind insults because the truth terrifies you. You think smirks and sneers can cover your lies. But the more you laugh, the clearer it becomes. You're not laughing at me. You're laughing at America. And America deserves better." Her tone was ice, her cadence unbroken. And for the first time all night, Trump didn't interrupt. The chamber shifted again. You could feel it, like a current pulling, invisible but undeniable. Reporters' pens scratched faster, cameras zoomed tighter. Even the moderators, exhausted from pounding their gavels, paused, because now the duel was no longer just noise. It was theater. It was strategy. It was war of the mind. Trump's smirk returned, but weaker now, like a mask slipping. He tried again, gesturing dismissively. "Please, don't flatter yourself. Nobody's buying your act." But Jasmine leaned forward, voice ablaze once more. "They're not buying, Mr. Trump. They're listening, and that's enough to terrify you." Gasps, murmurs. And in that moment, the balance shifted one step further. This wasn't about volume anymore. It was about control. And Jasmine had just seized it. The tension was unbearable, stretched taut like a violin string ready to snap. Who would break first? Who would slip? Every eye in the chamber watched, waiting for the crack. Trump twitched, his fingers drumming on the desk, his smirk now a nervous tick rather than a weapon. Jasmine remained still, silent, deadly calm. The battlefield had changed, and for the first time in the night, Donald Trump looked cornered. This wasn't about words anymore. This was about who had the steel to outlast the silence, who had the strength to let the tension choke the other. And for now, the answer was clear. The silence was broken not by words, but by paper. Trump leaned forward, his smirk returning like a mask being slammed back onto his face. From beneath the desk, he pulled out a folder thick with documents. The sound of it hitting the wood was thunder. "This," he announced, his voice booming with triumph, "is the truth they don't want you to see." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Reporters scrambled to capture every movement, every syllable. He flipped the folder open and held up a sheaf of papers, shaking them dramatically in the light. "These," he declared, waving them like holy scripture, "prove Jasmine Crockett is a fraud, a liar, bought and paid for. She talks about justice, but here's the proof she's nothing but corruption wrapped in a smile." The room erupted. Some lawmakers leaned forward eagerly, nodding, whispering to one another. Others sat back, cautious, but visibly unsettled. Trump could smell the shift, momentum swinging back into his hands. He slammed the papers down again. You see? You wanted evidence? You wanted the receipts? Here they are. And every American watching tonight will know exactly what kind of snake Jasmine Crockett really is. The crowd stirred like a mob on the edge of frenzy. For the first time since the hearing began, the ground beneath Jasmine seemed to tilt. Eyes darted toward her. Doubt flickered across faces. Trump grinned wide, feeding on the doubt. Her whole career is a lie. Every word out of her mouth, scripted. Every act of so-called justice, fake. And now you all see it. The gavel pounded, desperate to restore order, but the damage was done. The papers lay on the desk like a weapon, and for a moment, Trump looked untouchable. But Jasmine did not flinch. She did not lunge for the papers. She did not shout in protest. She simply watched. Her eyes never left his. Her silence, once again, became a blade. When the chamber quieted enough for her voice to cut through, she spoke. Her tone was calm, steady, but sharp enough to draw blood. "Mr. Trump," she said, "you're holding a stack of lies and calling it evidence." Laughter rippled faintly from the gallery, but she didn't pause. Her words were precise, each one driving deeper. "You expect America to believe you? A man who has lied more than 30,000 times while in office? You think a handful of papers you refuse to let anyone authenticate, suddenly turn fiction into fact?" Trump's face twitched. He slammed his palm against the desk. "They're real, they're all real, signed, sealed, undeniable." But Jasmine raised her hand, her eyes locked on him, her voice cutting through his fury like a scalpel. "Then explain this," she said, holding up a single page she had been waiting to reveal. "Because the signature you just showed is dated on a day you were golfing in Scotland. And unless you were signing documents from a putting green overseas, this entire file is worthless." The room went still. Reporters froze mid-scribble. Senators who had been nodding along minutes earlier now blinked in disbelief. Trump's mouth opened, then closed. He reached for the papers, rifling through them as though he might find a hidden answer between the lines. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice growing stronger with every word. "You forge, you fabricate, you lie, and you think volume makes it truth. But truth doesn't shout, Mr. Trump. Truth stands. And right now, all your noise is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions." The chamber erupted. Cheers, jeers, shouts of astonishment. It was chaos, but chaos on her side. Trump tried to rise, tried to speak, but his voice drowned in the uproar. His so-called Trump card had turned to ash in his hands. Jasmine let the storm rage. She stood tall, silent once more, her gaze never leaving him. Her calm was louder than his folder, louder than his bluster, louder than every desperate cry of "fake." The balance of power had shifted again, and this time, it was not swinging back. The reckoning was tightening its grip, and Trump, for all his bluster, looked smaller than ever. Then the mask cracked. He slammed both fists against the desk, the sound echoing like gunfire through the chamber. Spit flew from his lips as he leaned into the microphone and bellowed words that scorched the air. "Bullshit, all of it, bullshit." The chamber gasped as one. The word rang out, raw and vulgar, broadcast live into millions of homes across America. A sitting president, shouting obscenities, unraveling in real time. Trump didn't stop. "You're a liar, a fraud, a damn disgrace," he snarled, pointing across the room. "You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. You're nothing." The gavel slammed down again and again, the chairman barking for order, but there was no order left. Trump's fury had shattered it, and Jasmine knew it. She rose slowly, deliberately, like a blade being unsheathed. Her eyes locked on him, not with rage, but with something far sharper, cold precision. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm yet merciless. "Mr. Trump," she began, "thank you." The room froze. Even Trump faltered, his jaw tightening in confusion. "Thank you," she repeated, her tone sharpening, "for showing America exactly who you are. Not a leader, not a president, Just a man so terrified of the truth that the only word you can cling to is bullshit. The audience erupted. Gasps collided with laughter, shouts with cheers. Trump tried to interject, but Jasmine raised her hand like a conductor, silencing an orchestra. You call me a fraud, she shot back, her voice now gaining fire. You call me nothing? Let's talk about nothing. Nothing is what you gave to the families left behind after your chaos. Nothing is what you offered to the sick, the poor, the broken. Nothing is what America got every time you chose yourself over the people you swore to serve. Her words struck like thunder, one after another, building, surging. You stand there, screaming like a bully caught in the act, and expect fear. But all America sees now is weakness. All they hear is a coward choking on his own lies. The gallery rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the chamber, rolling louder, stronger, drowning out even the chairman's desperate pounding of the gavel. Trump's face flushed crimson. He barked curses, tried to shout her down, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Jasmine pressed forward, every word a hammer. You think obscenities make you strong? They make you small. You think volume makes you right? It makes you desperate. And you think America can't see through this circus? Look around, Mr. Trump. They already have. She pointed not at him, but at the chamber, at the faces lit with recognition, at the cameras capturing every second. Her words weren't just aimed at Trump. They were aimed at history, and history was listening. The crowd broke again. Cheers, stomping, applause so thunderous it shook the marble columns. Even members of Congress who had remained silent could not resist, their hands striking together despite the gavel's relentless crack. This wasn't a hearing anymore. It wasn't even an argument. It was a reckoning, immortalized in real time. Trump stood there shouting into the void, his obscenities ringing hollow. Jasmine stood tall, unshaken, her voice etched into the record like stone. And in that moment, the balance of power was no longer in question. The president had lost control. The warrior had seized it. This wasn't just a counterattack. It was the counterattack. The one that would be replayed, quoted, studied, etched forever as the moment Donald Trump's fury was eclipsed by Jasmine Crockett's fire. The legendary clash had been born. And America, watching from living rooms and phones and newsrooms across the nation, knew they had just witnessed history roar alive. But the roar wasn't finished. It was only the beginning. Screens flickered across the chamber as a team of experts stepped forward. Cybersecurity veterans, data analysts, specialists armed not with slogans, but with code and proof. Their voices didn't shake. Their eyes didn't flinch. The chairman gave a nod, and one of them addressed the room. We've examined the files President Trump presented, he said, his voice steady, surgical. And the results are clear. This evidence is fabricated. Gas shot through the chamber. The air seemed to fold in on itself, heavy and electric. Another expert stepped up, pointing to a massive screen where frames of Trump's so-called video played. Freeze, zoom, reverse. With every click, the truth bled through. Here, timestamps that don't align. Here, metadata altered. And here, pixels stitched together from multiple sources. A digital forgery, plain and simple. The chamber stirred with murmurs that swelled into thunder. What had been Trump's weapon now became a boomerang, cutting back toward him with merciless precision. Jasmine rose again, her voice low but laced with fire. Mr. Trump, not only did you lie, she paused, the silence tightening like a snare. You lied badly. A ripple of laughter broke across the room, sharp and biting. She stepped forward, closer to the microphone, her gaze unyielding. You handed this nation a fraud wrapped in your own arrogance, and when it unraveled, what did you show us? Not courage, not leadership, but fear. Her tone sharpened, every word carrying weight. Mr. Trump, you are not just a liar. You are a coward. The chamber ignited. Cheers, claps, even stomps rattled the floor. The gavel now powerless against the wave of voices. Trump's face darkened to a shade of purple, his hands gripping the desk so hard his knuckles went white. He shouted over the noise, spewing denials, calling it witchcraft, deep state, fake tech. But the words no longer carried weight. They fell flat, swallowed by the evidence blazing across the screens for all to see. Every freeze frame, every forensic highlight, every irrefutable glitch was another nail hammered into the coffin of his defense. The tide was shifting. The chamber could feel it. The nation could feel it. For years, Trump had thrived on spectacle. Noise louder than reason, anger hotter than fact. But now, in the glare of digital truth, that spectacle looked brittle, like glass beginning to crack. Jasmine pressed harder, relentless. You scream about hoaxes, but the only hoax here is the one you tried to sell. You hide behind insults because you can't stand in front of facts. You drown in rage because you can't swim in truth. Her words seared, each one sharper than the last. And this time, there was no interruption, no distraction, just the sight of a man unraveling, live as the walls of evidence closed in. Trump bellowed again, but his voice was fraying, cracking. His insults landed like sparks in a storm, loud but meaningless. Meanwhile, Jasmine's composure was steel. Her power was not in shouting louder, but in standing taller. The experts stood beside her like sentinels, their data irrefutable, their screens glowing with damning proof. And behind them the chamber, the people, the country, leaned her way. The gavel struck, but this time it wasn't to silence. It was to acknowledge. The tide had turned. Trump sat, his rage boiling, but his power thinning with every second. Jasmine stood, radiant and unshaken, the embodiment of a truth that could not be shouted down. The battle of words had erupted into a war of evidence, and in that war, Trump was bleeding ground fast. The justice side, her side, was no longer on the defensive. They were advancing. The chamber wasn't just watching a fight anymore. They were watching a collapse. They were watching a throne tremble. And for the first time in years, the idea of accountability no longer felt like a dream. It felt inevitable. The balance had shifted, the proof had landed, the eruption had begun, and now there was no escape. Both Trump and Jasmine rose at once, their chairs scraping back with a screech that sliced through the chamber. Two figures standing tall, locked in a collision course. No papers, no screens, no middle ground. This was eye to eye, soul to soul, and neither was blinking. Trump jabbed a finger across the chamber, his voice cracking like thunder. You are a disgrace, a fraud. You don't deserve to stand in this hall, let alone speak my name. The room jolted, gas colliding with the venom in his words. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her own hand shot forward, finger aimed square at him, her voice sharp as steel. You are the fraud, Donald. You've lied to your people, betrayed their trust, and now you stand here stripped bare, a coward in the light of truth. The chamber froze. Every breath seemed to hang in the air, heavy, waiting. Trump's face twisted into fury. He slammed a fist against the desk, the sound reverberating like a war drum. You think you can stand against me? Against my legacy? I built this country's strength. You're just a parasite feeding off my name. His words spat fire, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the weight pressing on him. Jasmine's voice rose in reply, not shouting, but cutting with precision. Your legacy is nothing but corruption painted as greatness. You didn't build America. You bled it. You drained it. And now you're terrified the truth will tear down the hollow empire you built for yourself. The gallery erupted. Cheers, shouts, boos, an orchestra of chaos that turned the chamber into an arena. The gavel hammered again and again, but no one was listening. Trump leaned forward, his whole body shaking with rage. You dare call me terrified? Look at you, riding this moment like a vulture, desperate for fame. You're nothing but noise, Crockett, a loudmouth with no power, no future, no shot at ever holding what I've held. The insult lashed, but Jasmine's reply came like a blade sliding clean through armor. I don't need your throne. I don't need your power. What I have is something you've never understood, truth. And with truth, I will outlast you, every time. Her words rang like a bell, sharp and undeniable. And for a flicker of a moment, Trump faltered. The crowd saw it. The tilt of his head, the blink that came too slow, the fury that was starting to look more like desperation. But he lunged again, roaring over the din. You call me a coward? Say it again. Say it to my face. Right here, Right now. Jasmine didn't hesitate. Her voice thundered through the hall. You're a coward, Donald Trump, and the whole world is watching you prove it. The chamber detonated. Applause, laughter, chants. Every sound layered into a wave that shook the walls. Trump shouted back, words swallowed by the eruption, his face crimson, veins rising against his skin. This was not a debate, not an inquiry, not a hearing. This was war. Two figures locked like gladiators, striking with nothing but words sharpened into weapons, each blow heavier than the last. The tension suffocated the room. Every eye was locked on them, every phone capturing the moment, every journalist scribbling furiously to keep pace with history in motion. No one was breathing easy, because everyone knew whoever faltered here, in this crucible, would not just lose the argument, they would lose everything. Trump's roar cracked again, but the words blurred, heavy and incoherent under the weight of his fury. Jasmine, by contrast, stood tall, her chest rising and falling with steady rhythm, her eyes locked on him with unflinching calm. She had become the storm, and he was standing in it, battered, breaking. For the first time in his career, Trump's bluster wasn't swallowing the stage, it was drowning in it. The chamber leaned forward, hearts pounding, knowing this was no longer about policy, no longer about politics. This was the final duel, the battlefield of legacies, and one of them was about to fall. The silence between their words was as deadly as the words themselves. Every pause a trigger, every breath a weapon. Trump hurled his final insult, voice raw, veins straining. You'll regret this day, Jasmine. You'll regret ever standing against me. Jasmine's reply was ice and fire all at once. The only regret will be yours, because history will remember me for standing, and it will remember you for falling. The chamber erupted again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was clarity. The crowd could feel it. The endgame had begun. This was the death match of words, of will, of truth versus fury, and only one would walk away unbroken. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She reached down to her stack of folders, her fingers steady, her eyes locked on Trump with the precision of a predator about to strike. The chamber hushed. Every microphone, every camera, every screen leaned closer. And then she said it, clear, calm, devastating. I hold here the sworn testimony of one of your closest allies, a man who stood at your side, a man who saw everything, and today he testifies against you. Trump froze. For the first time in hours, the air around him seemed to collapse. The bluster in his chest shrank. The sneer on his lips faltered. It was as if the weight of those words had knocked the wind clean out of him. Jasmine unfolded the document slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension squeeze tighter and tighter around him. The hall was silent now. No jeers, no applause, just the sound of history drawing breath. She read aloud. Donald Trump knowingly and willfully manipulated his office for personal gain. He directed subordinates to cover the truth. He betrayed the very oath he swore to uphold. Each sentence landed like a hammer. Each word was a nail driven into the coffin of his defense. Trump's lips parted, but no sound came. His hands twitched at the edges of the desk, clawing for something. Anger, denial, a lifeline. But nothing came. The silence was louder than any outburst he could have given. Jasmine's voice cut through it like lightning. You've called me names. You've shouted. You've cursed. You've tried to bury me under your noise. But the truth doesn't shout, Donald. It stands. And now it stands against you. The chamber stirred. Gasps. A low rumble of realization spreading like wildfire. Trump's shoulders sank. He opened his mouth again, the familiar roar building, but it broke before it left his throat. For a heartbeat, the entire nation saw something they had never seen in him before. Not rage, not swagger, but silence. And Jasmine seized it. She stepped forward, her voice no longer just cutting. It was final, merciless. You lied to America. You preyed on its faith. And when you were cornered, you tried to burn the truth down with your fire. But today, Donald, the fire went out, and all that's left is ash. Her words cracked like a sword splitting through armor. The chamber erupted. Cheers exploded from the galleries. Applause thundered from walls that had once echoed only with jeers. Phones lit up, recording the moment that was already being etched into history. Trump staggered back in his chair, his face pale, his mouth working soundlessly as if words might somehow crawl back to him. But the silence clung. It dragged him down like chains. He was cornered, and everyone saw it. Jasmine didn't stop. Her final strikes came swift, clean, unforgiving. You can call me names until your breath runs dry. You can pound your fists until the wood splinters beneath them. But you cannot outrun the truth. And now it has caught you. She leaned forward, eyes blazing, her words the coup de grace. You are finished. The roar that followed shook the chamber. Chants rose, echoing against the marble. Reporters' pens flew. Screens across America lit up with headlines screaming in real time. And Trump sat there unmoving, a man hollowed out in the very arena he once commanded. For Jasmine, the battle had been more than words. It had been survival. It had been defiance. And now with the finishing blow, it had become victory. The reckoning was over, and Donald Trump had lost. But loss didn't come quietly for him. Red-faced, trembling, he lurched forward in his chair, pounding the desk with a fury that rattled the microphones. You think this means anything? He roared, his voice cracking. You're all liars, every last one of you. Witch hunt, fraud. Spit flew as he shouted, the rage boiling over into incoherent curses that made even his allies shift uncomfortably in their seats. Once his tirades had silenced rooms. Once his fury had bent institutions to his will. But now it was hollow, a storm that had lost its thunder. Jasmine stood. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her silhouette rose against the chaos like a pillar of stone. When she spoke, her voice carried clear and sharp, cutting through the din. The truth cannot be buried. The words rang out across the chamber, across the nation, across the living rooms and phones and newsrooms where millions were watching with their breath held tight. Trump howled again, throwing his arms wide. But the sound was swallowed, because the chamber itself had turned. One by one, lawmakers rose to their feet, then another, and another, until the entire chamber stood, a wall of applause crashing over his tantrum. The thunder of clapping hands grew louder, stronger, echoing like a drumbeat of judgment. For every insult he hurled, another pair of palms smacked together. For every curse he spat, another voice joined the roar of approval for her. Jasmine didn't raise her hands. She didn't bask. She simply stood, her chin lifted, her eyes steady, letting the wave wash over her but not move her. Because this moment wasn't about her. It was about what she carried. It was about justice refusing to bow. In the galleries above, people cheered, some with tears streaking their cheeks. On the streets outside, chants rose, echoing into the night. Justice! 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 Trump slammed his fist one last time, his voice straining in a final scream. But it was useless. The cameras no longer followed him. The nation no longer listened. They were fixed on her, and she gave them words that would outlive the chaos, words that would be written in headlines and carved into memory. We are not here to serve power. We are here to serve truth. And no matter how loud the lie, the truth will always speak louder. The applause shook the foundations of the chamber. It was not polite. It was not ceremonial. It was primal, electric, alive. Trump sank back in his chair, chest heaving, eyes darting like a cornered beast. Defiant, yes, but diminished. For the first time, undeniably diminished. And Jasmine. Jasmine was more than a congresswoman now. She was a symbol, a fire that could not be smothered, a voice that could not be drowned. The hearing adjourned in chaos and triumph all at once. The gavel struck wood, but the sound was lost under the chant that surged through the chamber. Justice! 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 Outside, crowds erupted as the doors opened. They surged forward, not toward Trump, but toward her. Phones reached, hands stretched, faces lit with hope. And she walked through them with steady steps, neither smiling nor grandstanding, only carrying the weight of what had been won and what was still to come. Because though Trump had lost the battle, he had not yet vanished. The shadows still lingered. The fight was not yet finished. But a seed had been planted. and a flame had been lit. Jasmine Crockett had become more than a fighter. She had become the symbol of a nation's demand that justice not only survive, but stand tall. A symbol that, no matter how fierce the storm, truth would rise again. The hearing ended in fire. The legend had only just begun. If this clash shook you, don't just scroll past, hold it, share it, talk about it, like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes that lies must be broken by truth. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where justice isn't whispered, it's shouted. Hit the bell, because the next reckoning won't be quiet. It'll be louder, sharper, and it might just change the way you see history's villains and heroes. This tale is a fictional dramatization drawn from real patterns of corruption, oppression, and the fight for dignity. Any resemblance to actual figures is either coincidence or a mirror for public reflection. Thank you for watching. Remember, justice is never given, it is fought for. This is Harrison Stories.